go, Senator Donkey. It's an interesting question. Would voluntary voting serve Australia better than the current system of compulsory voting?
We've got a really interesting panel to discuss this further. A broadcaster, now Senator-elect Darren Hinch, Spencer Davis, who has started a petition calling for 16-year-olds to have the option of voting, Professor of Politics Clem McIntyre, and Matthew Lesh from the Institute of Public Affairs. It's great to see you all this morning. Senator-elect Hinch, let's start with you. You famously refused to vote until the last election. Why didn't you take that opportunity, which, frankly, people in many countries risk their lives to be able to do?
Well, one of the countries you left out, of course, was the United Kingdom, where we base our Westminster system of government, and voting's not compulsory there. Look, I should be campaigning in favour of compulsory voting because I got the donkey vote. But I think it should be you've got a right to vote and it's precious. You should have the right not to vote. Now, I was in court a while ago arguing unsuccessfully before getting fined again, and I asked an electoral official, do you ever make exemptions? And she said yes. On philosophical grounds and religious grounds, people can be exempted from voting. Well, my philosophy is, as an atheist, I don't want to vote for a lot of reasons, and I think it should not be compulsory.
So what are the benefits, do you think, of not having a voluntary vote? I mean, we keep looking at the American system, which has 40% voting. OK, in New Zealand they have more than 90% voting, but it would make the politicians, and would-be politicians, get off their backsides and campaign. I went out and covered 11,250 kilometres around Victoria and New South Wales in the Justice bus to try and get people, convince them to vote for me. In the Senate, for other parties, you just sit back, it's compulsory, and take your quota, and the party hacks get the jobs.
Professor McIntyre, let's bring you in. You're a staunch supporter of compulsory voting. Why do you think it's so important in a democracy?
Well, largely because I think we get better outcomes as a result of that. So let's just very quickly look at the case of the UK that Darren Hinch mentioned. 66% turnout at the last election, but the Conservative Party won only about 36% of that vote, so about a quarter of all of the voters actually voting for the government, and yet that's a government with a majority. I question the legitimacy of that government in terms of the mandate that it has and the assent of the people. We know that governments, when there's voluntary voting, tend to concentrate their policies onto those who vote. So rather than politicians going out and winning the voters, as Darren Hinch is suggesting, we're in danger of seeing politicians simply pander to those that they know will attend. So those who are disadvantaged, those with poor education, non-English-speaking background, are less likely to have governments worrying about the outcomes for them. And lastly, we know in systems with compulsory voting, we do get better outcomes. We get less corruption. We get a better spread of resources, better access to education and so on. More trust in the system and, critically, less corruption in regimes where there is compulsory voting rather than those with voluntary voting.
Matthew, if you could vote on this, you would tick the no compulsory voting box. Why?
Look, I think it's fundamentally illiberal to have as the premise of your democracy forcing people to vote. Having the right to vote to me means also having the right not to vote, to express a democratic opinion that none of the candidates share your viewpoint and that you choose not to put one in any of their boxes. I'm also kind of worried about the impact that compulsory voting is having on our national politic. I think it really often makes our politicians lazy. It means that, as Darren has said, that they don't have to go out there and put forward a particularly positive, persuasive set of policies to get people to vote for them. Instead, they often can just focus on the negative and just try and persuade them or persuade the middle ground not to vote for the other guy.
Although, Matthew, we did see opposition leader Bill Shorten, I can't remember the amount of kilometres that he covered campaigning, and he also famously had these 100 positive policies. You don't think that Bill Shorten was campaigning hard, which apparently even some people within the coalition are even saying, look, he campaigned really hard. You don't agree?
Look, I think Bill Shorten's final week focusing on the Mediscare campaign was a perfect example of the fact that rather than trying to focus on his own policies, he wanted to try and just scare people into not voting for the other guy. I think Bill Shorten couldn't even really name the 100 policies. It was more of a slogan rather than a set of kind of a concise narrative that he was trying to put forward. And I think that if we didn't have compulsory voting, he couldn't have run such a negative campaign. He would have been able to be actually positive.
Spencer, why do you want to vote so young, and when you are 18, do you think it should be voluntary or not?
See, I think it's not that young people want the vote, it's that it's unfair that young people don't have the vote. Young people at the age of 16 are being given the same responsibilities as older people. You know, we have to pay taxes, you know, we're allowed on the roads, and yet we're not being given representation in Parliament, and this is doing a few different things. It means that politicians aren't looking at young people as a valuable demographic as much as they would if we could vote, because we can't vote. We don't have a Minister for Youth, and we don't have a national peak youth body representing young people. So I think that it's not that I particularly want to vote, although I do. I think it's that young people need the option to vote.
But if it's optional at 16, it should be optional at 60.
See, I think above 18, the voting should actually be mandatory for the reasons the other people have said, but also we need a politically educated public. So if people know that they need to vote, they are more likely to take a more active role in the democratic process. Yeah.
More likely to be engaged in the process, they're more likely to be informed, they're more likely to understand what's going on and cast a vote that actually matters and is reflective. We're not a true democracy unless we have the voice of all of the people being heard. Now again, there's nothing to stop people casting or attending the polling station and choosing not to vote for any of the candidates, but I don't think it's a huge price to have people attend and be asked to express a view. It gives a legitimacy to the whole process.
Great Britain, the United States, Canada, New Zealand, they're not, quote, true democracies.
Well, a country that has a government with a majority that depends upon about a quarter of the vote, I wonder about the legitimacy of that democracy. We might not like the outcome that we've got in Australia with a hung parliament, but we know that it's a genuine expression of the people's views. And when it comes to negative campaigning, if you want to see negative campaigning, go to the US, where negative campaigning is at an all-time high and fewer people are engaged in the process.
Last time I looked, nearly 1.5 million Australians weren't even on the roll.
Senator-elect Darren Hinch still wants the last word.
Of course, always.
Still wants the last word.
Look, it's a really interesting debate. We really appreciate you all. Yes, well, look, we appreciate you all giving us your views this morning. Thank you.